Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into one of the most shocking developments in Eastern Europe, the complete shutdown of Poland's border with Belarus, a move that sent shockwaves through Moscow, disrupted critical trade routes, and left hundreds of trains stranded across the region. This isn't just a political gesture or a temporary inconvenience. It's a major geopolitical and economic rupture that could reshape trade, logistics, and even the broader balance of power in Europe. So, let's unpack what happened, why it happened, and what it means for Russia, Belarus, Poland, and the wider region. The collapse of the Belarus route, once seen as Moscow's vital bridge to Europe, marks a turning point in the tense standoff between Russia and the West. For years, Belarus served as a crucial transit corridor for Russian goods, energy supplies, and industrial materials moving to and from the European Union. But now, with Poland's border completely closed, that artery has been cut off. This sudden move didn't come out of nowhere. It's the culmination of months of diplomatic escalation, security incidents, and mounting mistrust between Warsaw, Minsk, and Moscow. Reports indicate that Poland's decision to close all remaining border crossings with Belarus came after a series of border provocations and alleged security threats. Polish officials have accused Belarus of facilitating migrant flows toward the EU frontier as a form of hybrid warfare, essentially using human pressure as a political weapon. At the same time, Poland has raised concerns about Russian military activity and intelligence operations being coordinated through Belarusian territory. To Warsaw, shutting the border is both a defensive measure and a political statement, a line in the sand that signals Poland won't tolerate any more provocations. But the consequences are far-reaching. The closure has stranded hundreds of freight trains loaded with coal, oil products, fertilizers, and manufactured goods. Many of these trains were en route from Russia to EU markets, while others were carrying European exports headed eastward. With the border sealed, these trains have no way forward and no clear route around the blockade. Satellite images and on-the-ground reports describe long lines of idle wagons stretching for kilometers, symbolizing the sudden paralysis of a once busy trade corridor. The collapse of this corridor exposes just how dependent Moscow and Minsk had become on Poland's rail infrastructure. After the start of the Russia-Ukraine war in 2022, the Kremlin began redirecting many of its exports away from Ukrainian territory and through Belarus instead. This Belarus-Poland route became Russia's lifeline to Europe, especially for goods that weren't covered by EU sanctions or that were indirectly rerouted through Belarusian intermediaries. Now, with that route gone, Moscow's options are shrinking fast. For Belarus, the situation is even more dire. The country's economy, already strained under Western sanctions, relied heavily on transit revenues from Russian exports. Each train that passed through Belarusian territory meant money in state coffers, fees, duties, and logistical income that helped Minsk stay afloat. Now, with Poland's border closed, that income has vanished overnight. Analysts warn that Belarus could face a severe economic downturn as trade and transport sectors grind to a halt. This move also underscores the growing isolation of both Russia and Belarus from the European economy. For decades, the idea of Europe and Russia being deeply interconnected through trade and transit routes was a cornerstone of regional stability. But since the invasion of Ukraine, those connections have been systematically dismantled, pipelines cut, trade corridors closed, and rail routes abandoned. The collapse of the Belarus route is the latest and perhaps most dramatic symbol of this decoupling. Poland's decision was not made lightly. It comes amid growing security fears, especially after reports of Belarus hosting Russian tactical nuclear weapons and allowing Russian military exercises near the border. Warsaw sees these developments as direct threats to its sovereignty and to NATO's eastern flank. By closing the border, Poland is effectively fortifying itself against what it perceives as hybrid aggression from both Minsk and Moscow. This includes not only military threats, but also cyber operations, propaganda campaigns, and the manipulation of migration flows. Meanwhile, Moscow's reaction has been one of outrage. Russian officials have condemned Poland's move as an act of economic sabotage and a violation of international trade norms. State media in Russia has described the closure as a blockade orchestrated by NATO to strangle the Russian economy. Yet behind the rhetoric, there's a growing sense of vulnerability in Moscow. Losing access to the Belarus-Poland corridor means losing a major logistics artery to the west. It also means that Russia will have to rely even more heavily on China, Central Asia, and maritime routes through the Black Sea and the Arctic, all of which come with higher costs and longer transit times. For European countries, the closure may also have ripple effects. Even though most EU nations have reduced their economic ties with Russia, some trade, particularly in agricultural products, industrial machinery, and chemical goods, continued through Belarusian intermediaries. Now, with the border sealed, even those limited flows are disrupted. This could affect supply chains in Central Europe and lead to higher costs for certain goods, though the broader EU economy is likely resilient enough to absorb the shock. What makes this situation particularly tense is that it's not just about economics, it's about security and symbolism. Poland, as a frontline NATO state, has taken on a leadership role in confronting both Russia and Belarus. By completely shutting the border, Warsaw is sending a message not just to Minsk, but to Moscow itself, that Poland will no longer be a passive bystander to aggression. It's also a warning to any country that aligns itself too closely with Russia, that economic isolation may follow. The humanitarian angle of this crisis is also significant. Thousands of truck drivers, logistics workers, and border residents are now caught in limbo. Some reports describe chaotic scenes at the crossings before they were sealed. Trucks backed up for kilometers, drivers running out of food and fuel, and border towns seeing sudden drops in trade activity. These human stories often get lost amid the big geopolitical headlines, but they reveal the real-world consequences of political decisions. Belarusian officials, for their part, have called Poland's action unfriendly and destructive. Minsk claims that it's ready for dialogue and that it's Poland that has escalated tensions. But few in the West believe that narrative. Belarus has consistently aligned itself with Moscow's agenda, allowing its territory to be used for Russian military operations and supporting Kremlin propaganda. As a result, the West now views Belarus not as a neutral buffer state, but as a co-belligerent in Russia's confrontation with NATO. From Moscow's perspective, this closure adds another layer of pressure to an already beleaguered economy. With Western sanctions cutting off access to global markets and technology, logistics routes have become vital lifelines. Losing one more of these routes complicates everything from energy exports to industrial supply chains. Even the Eurasian Economic Union, Russia's regional trade bloc, is feeling the strain. Kazakhstan, Armenia, and other members depend on transit routes through Belarus to reach European customers. With those routes blocked, intra-bloc trade is likely to slow down dramatically. Interestingly, this development also strengthens the strategic importance of other corridors, especially the so-called North-South transport corridor connecting Russia with Iran and India, and Chinese belt and road routes through Central Asia. Moscow has been investing heavily in these alternatives, but they cannot easily replace the speed and capacity of the traditional European land routes. For now, there's simply no substitute for the Belarus-Poland railway network that has been closed off. Analysts believe this situation could persist for months, if not years. Neither side appears willing to compromise. Poland insists that security must come first, while Russia and Belarus accuse Warsaw of weaponizing trade for political gain. The EU has largely backed Poland's stance, emphasizing that border security and national sovereignty are non-negotiable. In Brussels, there's little appetite for dialogue with Minsk or Moscow under current conditions. The political implications for Belarus are particularly serious. President Alexander Lukashenko has long balanced between Russia and the West, but since 2020 he's been increasingly dependent on Moscow for financial and military support. With the border now closed and trade collapsing, Belarus will have little choice but to lean even further into Russia's orbit. That could mean greater political subordination and possibly even deeper integration between the two countries, something that has been a long-term Kremlin objective. For Russia, the bigger picture is grim. Each new disruption, whether it's a pipeline cutoff, a border closure, or a sanctions expansion, pushes the country further into isolation. The Kremlin may talk about pivoting to Asia or developing self-sufficiency, but the loss of access to European logistics networks represents a serious strategic setback. It reduces Moscow's leverage, weakens its economy, and narrows its global influence. Poland, on the other hand, is emerging as one of the most assertive voices in Europe's response to Russia. Its decision to shut the border entirely, despite potential economic losses, reflects a broader transformation in Polish foreign policy, from caution to confrontation. Warsaw sees itself as the guardian of NATO's eastern frontier and is willing to bear the economic cost of standing firm against what it views as aggression from the east. This has also strengthened Poland's standing within NATO and among its Baltic neighbors, who share similar security concerns. There's also a military dimension to all of this. With the Belarusian route closed, the movement of Russian supplies, troops, or dual-use goods becomes much harder. If Russia had any plans to use Belarus as a logistical base for future operations in Eastern Europe, those plans are now in jeopardy. The Polish border closure not only blocks trade, but also tightens NATO's control over a key section of the European frontier. It's a strategic chokehold that limits Moscow's operational flexibility. Energy is another key area affected by this shutdown. Some Russian energy exports, particularly refined products and chemical materials, used to move through Belarus into Poland and onward to other EU states. With that corridor gone, Russia will have to find new routes through the Baltic states or via maritime transport, both of which are more expensive and less efficient. Over time, this could further erode Russia's revenues from energy exports and contribute to domestic economic strain. As this standoff continues, both sides are preparing for a long period of confrontation. Poland has increased its border security, deploying additional troops, surveillance drones, and fortifications. Belarus has done the same on its side, framing Poland's actions as aggressive and unjustified. The atmosphere along the border is tense, with each side accusing the other of provocations and misinformation. International observers worry that the situation could escalate further. Any incident, even a minor one, along this heavily militarized frontier could spark a broader crisis. NATO has already pledged full support for Poland, while Russia continues to back Belarus politically and militarily. In such a volatile environment, miscalculation is a constant risk. For ordinary citizens in both countries, the closure means more than just headlines. It affects jobs, trade, and everyday life. Polish farmers and transport companies that once relied on cross-border business are now facing losses. Belarusian small businesses that traded with Polish partners have seen their incomes disappear. Families divided by the border can no longer visit each other. What was once a line of commerce and connection has become a wall of division and distrust. In the bigger picture, this border shutdown could symbolize the final breakdown of the post-Cold War European order, the idea that borders could be open, that trade could promote peace, and that East and West could coexist economically despite political differences. That vision has been fading for years, but the collapse of the Belarus route may be the moment when it truly ends. Looking ahead, it's hard to see a quick resolution. Poland shows no sign of reopening the border until it feels secure, and that could take a long time. Russia and Belarus, meanwhile, will likely respond with retaliatory measures, perhaps closing their own borders to Polish goods or stepping up pressure in other areas. This cycle of escalation could continue, deepening the divide between Eastern and Western Europe. Still, there are lessons to be drawn. One is that infrastructure, railways, borders, ports can be as powerful as armies when it comes to shaping geopolitics. The shutdown of a few crossings has achieved what no sanctions list or diplomatic note could. It has physically separated Russia and Belarus from Europe. Another lesson is that political trust, once broken, takes decades to rebuild. The bridge between Moscow, Minsk, and Warsaw isn't just closed. It may have been destroyed altogether. For now, the trains remain still, the tracks empty, and the border silent. What was once a lifeline for trade has become a symbol of division. The collapse of Moscow's Belarus route is more than a logistical crisis. It's a reflection of a fractured continent where cooperation has given way to confrontation and where every border closure deepens the shadow of a new Cold War. The world is watching closely. Will this be the start of a new era of hard borders in Europe, or can diplomacy find a way back? That's the question policymakers in Warsaw, Minsk, and Moscow must face, and the answer will shape the future of the region for years to come. Thank you for watching. If you found this breakdown helpful and want to stay updated on more international developments like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Your support helps us bring you more in-depth analysis of the world's biggest geopolitical stories. Until next time, stay informed and stay safe.